All right, everybody, welcome back. This is September 25th. This is Monday. Today we're going to move on from women's voting rights and immigration, which we talked about last week, to the Jim Crow South. Now, after the 1860s were over, Lincoln, frees the slaves with the 13th Amendment. The 14th Amendment is passed, stating that anyone that is born in the United States hereby is a United States citizen, and he is hereby protected under the Constitution. The Jim Crow era in the South is essentially the South's need to make African Americans feel inferior after, one, they've been freed, and second, now they're going to be equally protected under the law by the federal government. It's the South's, the local government or the state government's need to still have some sort of autonomy or legitimacy or power, and to not lose that power at this point. So that what they do is they try their best to make African people of African descent feel like second-class citizens. So we're going to kind of talk about that today. So we started off with how is a discriminating person different than a discriminatory person. Now, a lot of students this morning said that, and earlier today thought that, this question hurt their head. So I gave them their opportunity. If you have trouble figuring out the difference, I said you can look it up on your phones. What you can do is to look up the difference and the definition of discriminating versus somebody who is a discriminatory person. And I have this definition here for you. A discriminating person is showing or indicating careful judgment and discernment, especially in matters of taste. Someone who's a connoisseur of cheeses, of wines, of breads, whatever it may be. The person has gone through plenty of experience and then is able to discriminate based on that experience. Knowing full and well, their experience is going to help them make accurate assumptions in matters of taste. Careful judgment. You're still judging something, but it's careful judgment. Someone who's discriminatory down here is being biased or having a belief or attitudes formed beforehand. So someone who's discriminatory has no recollection whatsoever. They're going to immediately go to judge and biasing somebody based on no experience with that individual person. Now, someone who's discriminating, again, has the experience. Someone who is an expert in their field and can show careful judgment in matters of taste on that way. Now, like I said, someone who's a connoisseur, in matters of taste, literally, because of what they do for a living, they taste wines, they taste breads, they taste cheeses, whatever it may be, they have the experience ahead of time, and they can discriminate, and they have careful judgment. But someone who's discriminatory is being biased or having a belief or attitude formed beforehand. Now, these are both as if we're using them as adjectives. All right, we're describing somebody. It's a descriptive word. A discriminating person, use careful judgment in their movie choice. All right, so discriminating in movies. That's not discriminating in movies, but the discriminating person with movies is something that's going to be more along the lines of careful judgment. Someone on the same end, though, however, who's discriminatory, a discriminatory person who wants to go to the movies will not watch a movie because they know an actor is in it, and they will never watch that actor because all their work they believe is trash. All right, so it's definitely a difference if we're looking this at from an adjective perspective. The difference is, however, that someone who is a discriminating person, as a descriptive word, it's not as negative as we would think. However, if we are now saying a person is discriminating, we turn it into a verb or an action, this is where we get the negative connotation with discrimination. And it's, that's why I'm looking at this as someone who's discriminating versus discriminatory. So be very, very careful how those words are thrown around in the future. Someone who is in the act of discriminating is a verb, yes, not good. But if you're looking at someone who's a discriminating person, maybe not really meaning what you think you're meaning here. So just be careful with that definition, all right? From there we move on, kind of talking about the case that really moves this doctrine forward of separate but equal. The case is called Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, and the Supreme Court really makes its biggest mistake decision. And up until this point, you could argue in United States history. Because here's the case. Homer Plessy is a man who was at 1/8 African and 7/8 white. He was arrested in Louisiana because he was sitting in an all-white train car. Now, he actually went to the conductor and to the people responsible for the railroad. He went up to them and he said, I am coming up here. I'm an African man, someone of African descent. I'm going to sit in this car, and you have to arrest me to get me off. So what they do, they arrested him. So he was arrested, and what he does afterwards is he sues the railroad company. It's almost like he was doing it on purpose, trying to make a point. And what happened was the courts ruled in favor of the railroad company, not only in the initial case, but the appeals courts. This goes all the way to the Supreme Court. Now, to give you an idea how tough that is, Supreme Court probably hears about maybe around 100, maybe less than 100 cases per year. They decide on them. tens of thousands of cases are appealed to the Supreme Court every year. So the percentage of a case that they take is not a lot. So, but they do hear this one. All right, separate but equal. When the courts rule, they rule against Plessy, saying that if the facilities are kept equal, they can remain separate. That's the decision they made. Excuse me, a constitutional law or a constitutional issue is allowed so long as if you keep the races separate, you can keep them separate as long as those facilities are equal. The problem is you can't keep them equal because, I don't know about you, but if Capital Area Transit got all new buses and decided to segregate people on those buses the way that they did back in the Jim Crow era, they won't be able to provide all new buses for both Africans, people of African descent or whites, or people with brown eyes or blue eyes, or people with blonde hair or dark hair. Whatever they decide to discriminate against, they won't be able to keep everything up for each individual, because if we're separating people based on that, there's no way any government, city, local, federal government could afford those particular issues. So the real situation is the Supreme Court thought that they could, so they rule against it. And this is where the case comes out. The opinion comes out as such. Rules for it saying, we consider the underlying fallacy of the plaintiff's argument to consist in the assumption that the enforced separation of the two races stamps the colored race with a badge of inferiority, meaning that if you are separated as someone from African descent in this time, you are now stamped with the badge of inferiority. You're going to take yourself as inferior. The courts, and this is why it's one of the worst decisions the Supreme Court ever made in U.S. history. It says, if this be so, this badge of inferiority is not given by any reason of anything found in the act of the inferiority, but solely because the colored race chooses to put that inferiority construction upon it. So that's something that's very, very important to understand, that the Supreme Court says if the colored races think that they're inferior, they're doing it because they think so, not because it's actually happening. And that's where this Supreme Court decision really gets just taken out of proportion, because in the future we see, train cars, buses, water fountains, bathrooms, anytime you have public transportation, they're separated. So, in the South it becomes very different. What we're going to look at here now, after this, I gave out a worksheet. It's like a guided reading worksheet. It looks like, if I can find it here, what I'm going to bring up here to you right now, it looks like, it's like a main ideas worksheet. You can actually download it on Canvas. You go back to Canvas and you go all the way down to the bottom of the page. I did put the link up here so you can see it. All right. But when it's just processing still, you're looking at supporting main ideas in this worksheet. I'll give you 3 main ideas. Not that they're debatable. These actually did happen in the South. So like during the 1890s, Southern states employed several tactics to deny African Americans the right to vote. These facts and main ideas are not debatable. These actually did happen. What I want you to do is, using the book pages here that you see up top, find 3 main points to support this main idea. There are 3 main ideas here. You need to find 3 supporting details to help support that claim. So that's pretty much what I'm looking here. We did this the rest of the class. It is not homework. I believe most classes got this first question done with the 3 points at least. So if you get that done, you come on in tomorrow on Tuesday, and we'll finish this up and continue talking about how the right to vote, especially for African Americans, what an election day might look like for someone of African descent living in the South. So that's what we're going to take a look at here. So you might want to come to class tomorrow, because you're going to be taking some examples of a 1960s Alabama literacy test. So this literacy test is something that I think you'll be very, very interested in, seeing how African Americans, especially in the South, were kept out of their right to vote. Just like women, how important the right to vote was for women, like we talked last week. African Americans here are kept from that right. So something to keep in mind moving forward, just to think about. All right. That's all I have for you today. Again, looking at this worksheet, if you want to download this and print it out and bring it in, you can. If not, I have plenty of copies here to get you the extras. So, do what you can, and make sure, if you follow along on Canvas too, if you want to kind of catch up on the video, at the very top here, the progressive era, the review here that you see at the top, this is something that can definitely help you out and help you catch up with some of these, issues with the Jim Crow era, especially. All right. Not everything in this video is about the Jim Crow era, but they do have a very good, video and section in this video about the Jim Crow era. All right. So just to give you a heads up on that, everyone have a fantastic day. See you tomorrow.